I'm Maria Bartiromo, and it is Monday, February 27th. Here are your top stories, 6 a.m. on the East Coast. A major blunder at the Oscars last night. Hollywood's biggest stage ended in confusion.
This is not a joke.
This is not a joke. I'm afraid they read the wrong thing.
This is not a joke.
Moonlight named Best Picture after the award was accidentally given to La La Land. Coming out more on this shocking mix-up that lit up social media last night and how the stars got political. As President Trump this morning prepares to address Congress, his administration is hard at work on the economy. I spoke with Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin on the president's big plans for tax reform. More on that interview coming up this morning. Terrifying moments, meanwhile, in Brazil to report several people injured after a float crashed during the country's Carnival parade. The latest on the injuries coming up. And could Apple have a Samsung problem? The details as the company investigates claims that an iPhone 7 Plus caught fire. Snapchat is set to make its debut on Wall Street this week. Going to be a big deal, but will things be as perfect as planned? Why the technology darling is turning its focus to the camera ahead of its IPO. And futures look like this morning. Markets expected to pull back this morning. We got a fractional loss in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, although it is coming off of an 11th straight record high close on Friday for the Dow Industrials. Check markets in Europe this morning, slightly higher. These markets have not given at all. We're seeing this rally continue. The FT 100 up 9.5 points, DAX index up 2 points, and the CAC 40 in Paris down a fraction. In Asia overnight, stocks were lower across the board. Take a look. Nikkei average down almost 1%. Shanghai Composite down 0.75%. Well, who wants to go for a walk? Nearly 1,000 bulldogs and their owners took to the streets in Mexico City. We've got those pictures for you coming up this morning. All those stories coming up this morning. And joining me to talk about it, Fox Business Network's Dagen McDowell, Republican strategist and Fox News contributor Tony Sayegh, and Kingsview Asset Management Chief Investment Officer Scott Martin. Good to see you.
How you guys doing?
Welcome
Great
back.
to see you, Maria.
Good to see you.
How are you?
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for putting me next to Dagen.
Exactly. Did you suck up?
I'm kind of upset that he got that seat. Let's just put it out there.
I got
right
here
now.
first.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Can we talk about how much news you broke in that Mnuchin interview last week? Please. It's had like all weekend long.
Thank you. No, I think he was very clear, and he really did talk a bit about the options that they're going through in terms of tax reform, whether it is some kind of a border tax or something that's reciprocal. So I agree. There was a lot of good news
related to the currency, too. And I appreciate you being so direct with them, too. Because think about the hearings and everything that's gone on in the last few weeks as far as how the questioning has been. At least we got some real answers, I believe,
we
from
did.
some direction.
He was very direct and solid.
And his confidence and optimism translated. You saw the reaction to his speech. It's all very positive from the markets, and it's setting the agenda. We're changing the conversation away from 8 years talking about redistribution to now talking about economic growth.
That's the key. And that has been the president's focus from the get-go, economic growth, really moving the needle. So I like to see every policy, whether it's rollback of regulation or tax reform or tapping into energy, all point toward economic growth.
That's exactly it.
And that's what's driving markets. Hollywood script, meanwhile, was flipped last night for one of the worst blunders in Oscar history. Last night, La La Land mistakenly won for Best Picture when the true winner was actually Moonlight. Let's watch exactly what presenters did when Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway made the announcement.
And the Academy Award for Best Picture.
You're impossible. Come on.
La La Land.
This is not a joke.
This is not a joke. I'm afraid they read the wrong thing.
This is not a joke. Moonlight has won Best Picture. Moonlight, Best Picture.
Warren, what did you do?
I want to tell you what happened. I opened the envelope, and it said, Emma Stone, La La Land. That's why I took such a long look at Faye and at you. I wasn't trying to be funny.
Now the fingers are being pointed at PricewaterhouseCoopers, the accounting firm that tallies the Oscar voting. It's reportedly apologizing this morning and saying that the presenters were given the wrong envelope before they went on stage. So what a story. I actually turned it off in the middle of it, to be honest with you, because it started to get political. It was politics light, but it was still.
Well, and this award wasn't presented until about midnight.
Yeah,
so that's past our bedtime. What does happen? PricewaterhouseCoopers goes to the Academy Awards with 2 briefcases, and each briefcase has a duplicate set of envelopes in it. Well, Emma Stone, as is tradition, after she won the Best Actress Academy Award, she had the card in her hand. So when Dunaway and Beatty go out to present Best Picture, somebody gave them Emma the wrong card for Best Actress. So that's why Warren Beatty came out. Warren Beatty came out and said, that's why I was hesitating, because the card said Emma Stone.
But it also said Best Actress.
Right, it said Emma Stone.
It was just the wrong card.
Right, and when they tell them ahead of time, just so you know, this is who you're going to read. See, that's the weird thing. I mean, how would he...
Should they always do that, then?
Well, wouldn't you think that he would be prepared?
But again, we do live three to 5 or 10 hours of live TV a day. You foul up, and in the moment, there's always that moment of, should I say this or not?
That's true. That's fair.
And that's what he had, and so he was like, you read it, Faye.
Which was not really a gentlemanly thing to do for Warren Beatty, fully knowing he was putting his co-host out there. Look, the politicization
first, though.
of this. Yeah, but if you have a sense it's wrong, maybe you should take the bullet. But the politicization, as you mentioned, Maria, of these award ceremonies has made it almost impossible to watch for somebody, even who doesn't have a right-leaning opinion, just an objective or non-political opinion. But so this kind of, I'm not going to say makes me glad, because I do feel sad for the people who were kind of hurt in this process. There's a lot of hard work that goes into these movies. But at the same time, it kind of is karma coming back a little bit.
Well, it was a major mistake for the Oscars.
Well, they'll find a way to blame the president for it, I'm sure. Yeah. It was probably Trump's fault,
Let's talk about presidential issues right now, because we did have some news over the weekend when I sat down with Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin about a host of topics, including the idea of a reciprocal tax and the plan for entitlements. Listen. The president has been talking to some manufacturing CEOs this week about the idea of a retaliatory tax. How does that different than a border tax?
Well, first of all, it's not a retaliatory tax, okay? It is an idea that he's looking at calling a reciprocal tax, which is basically saying we want to create a level playing field so that other countries treat us the way we're treating them.
Do you need to hit the entitlements sooner rather than later?
We are not touching those now, so don't expect to see that as part of this budget, okay? We are very focused on other aspects, and that's what's very important to us, and that's the president's priority.
The president's going to be releasing a budget in just the next couple of weeks. And, of course, we're going to hear from the president tomorrow night in his joint session to Congress. Tony Sayegh, it seems like the president is warming up to some kind of a revenue raise within this tax cut package.
Well, they clearly want to make it deficit neutral to a large degree, so that opens up the conversation about these types of things. You have to remember, Maria, in the globalization movement in the last 20 years, there is a feeling among a lot of Americans that we're the ones who always drew the short end of the stick. You have 160 countries that have some sort of VAT tax. They tax our products, all products that are imported into their country and distributed into their country. So to say that we want to now have some parity with these countries as well through some sort of process on the tax side here, I think is fair, is smart, and does change the conversation the way Donald Trump campaigned on. He does want better deals for American companies, American products. And while our consumers certainly have benefited from globalization, there's a strong argument to make to say our manufacturers certainly haven't, our products certainly haven't in some regards. So there has to be this kind of conversation about how we're going to make adjustments.
I think it's 100 countries at least that have some kind of a VAT tax, by the way.
Right, and I think that's the dark side of it, is what does it do, Tony, to consumers? Because if you look at the VAT countries and some of the bigger ones that have a lot of imports, it's hurt the consumers as far as pricing. So we don't want want to force consumers to suddenly pay 10, 15, 20% more in cost as far as goods production or goods purchasing because of a VAT tax.
But there's
for example,
also
or a
the
border
question
tax.
of how do you pay for tax cuts, Dagan? And this border tax is expected to raise $1.1 trillion over 10 years.
Right, and that's one of the reasons that Paul Ryan and Kevin Brady jumped on with this. It came out of, I was talking to Steve Forbes about this over the weekend, and it came out of originally a liberal economist out in California came up with this idea. I think it's going to be a struggle because politically there are a lot of congressmen and senators who are going to have to go to their constituents and say if they get on board with a border adjustment tax, their prices are going to go up at Walmart, at Target. Oil and gas prices will go up, at least initially. And it's a big bet on as you pointed out, it's a big bet on the direction of the dollar because the dollar is supposed to inflate and offset that tax on imported goods.
And you have interest rates falling amidst the dollar weakening year to date. I mean, that's the tough part. You have a lot of cross currents going on.
There's a front page article in the Wall Street Journal today how stocks and Treasury bonds have now started moving in tandem. So stocks are up, but bonds are also rallying. So the bond market seems to say, you know what? The Trump policies are not going to stimulate growth in the way that we think. They're not going to re-trigger inflation. So there's that. Who do you believe? Stock investors or bond investors?
But there's an extreme optimism for the tax cuts, tax reform, and regulatory relief, and they're hoping that it happens sooner than later. I think the concern, the way I'm reading it from the markets, is they want it to happen fast.
Yeah.
They don't want this just to be a prolonged, protracted debate for the next year and a half.
Well, look, he's been very clear. And Stephen Mnuchin this weekend said to me, look, they're both important. It's not Obamacare is more important than tax reform, but we know that we need to get Obamacare done now and tax reform done right after. So they're both important. He had a timeline in that interview of getting something out by August, but he did say that the impact's largely going to be in 2018 rather than 2017, which is a little
And then you have midterm elections. I mean, isn't that crazy? We're already going to be thinking about the fall of 2018.
There's two timelines at play, the way I see it. August is actually the first of about 200 days. That's when Congress goes into essentially recess for a very prolonged period of time. So you're working up against that hard deadline, which is why I always said you never analyze the first 100 days, analyze the first 200 days. Then you have the beginning of the new fiscal year soon thereafter in the fall. So it is kind of a natural timeline, and I think August is a very reasonable goal to have set. And it's good that it was set, by the way, because I think that will give confidence.
By the
to
way,
the
I
markets.
spoke with an auto analyst about this border tax, and the auto analyst said to me that on average, your average car in the U.S. costs about $30,000. He said a border tax would push that number to $40,000. Having said that, the idea of growth is a big one. So once you actually start to see the needle move on growth, you make that up. But you make a good point about inflation. These are all the issues that we discussed. Stay tuned for more of my sit-down interview with Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin right here on Mornings with Maria at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. We've got a lot more that came out of that interview, which first aired yesterday on Sunday Morning Futures. Coming up, a celebration turned to chaos when a float in Rio's Carnival Parade crashes, injuring at least 20 people. The very latest on those injuries coming up. And then changing focus, why Snapchat's parent company, Snap, wants to reinvent themselves just days before actually going public. Back in a moment.